Hey, psych students, welcome to Chapter 5, Learning. This is a really great chapter, and I'm starting off not in presentation mode, and I will explain to you when we get a couple slides in. There are going to be some slides that move very slowly in presentation mode because one arrow goes and a box open and then something else opens. So when you're in the still PowerPoint, you can open it up yourself. But after we get through those slides, I'll go back into presentation mode. So you'll see what I'm talking about when I get there. All right, so as always, I start off with the available study hall or crash courses that are available, and I link them into your presentation. So if you go under study hall, click on this link. It is What Even is Learning, followed by the two crash courses, How to Train Your Brain, where we talk about, well, not we, where the crash course guys, they talk, or Hank, talks about Pavlov, which I'm going to discuss in this. And then, of course, the Bobo Beatdown, which is the Bobo doll experiment, which I will also go over. But he does a really good job, talking really fast and giving you just a snapshot of those studies. So let's go on. All right, so we are going to cover classical conditioning, operant conditioning, observational learning, cognitive factors in learning, and then biological, cultural, and psychological factors in learning. Okay, so basically, under the learning theory, the definition of learning is a systematic, relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs through experience. So anything you learn, you can unlearn. So it's not that you forget, it's just we learn a behavior, right? And that behavior might be good for us. It might serve us well, or it might not. So anything we practice, they say practice makes perfect. Actually, practice makes permanent if we really think about it. We don't ever really forget about it. But anything you learn, you can unlearn. And you'll see that a little bit down the road. So, how we do this learning is through three of these concepts: behaviorism, associative learning conditioning, and then observational learning. So, I'm going to break those down a little more as we go into this. All right, so let me put this one in presentation mode. All right, so when we look at classical conditioning is that innate learned behavior versus operant conditioning is learning through behaviors of rewards and consequences. So when we look at this, okay, operant conditioning, performing well in swim competition, right? So she is swimming, she's competing, that's the behavior that becomes associated with getting awards. So those would be the consequences. So again, when you're working within operant conditioning, that is about getting something out of it. When we look at classical conditioning, so when you look at this picture, the what was once a neutral stimulus, let's say a doctor's office, you pair that with getting a shot at the doctor's office, you associate the going to the office with maybe pain. So we look at here, control of a response, which is fear, is shifted from an inborn stimulus, the shot, to a new stimulus, the office. So just the office alone, like going to the doctors, going to the dentist, just thinking about those, you associate maybe some fear because, oh no, I'm going to get a shot, or oh no, I'm going to get a cavity filled, something like that. All right, so this is where I'm going to go back off of that because it just does so many different things. All right, so you're going to get a bunch of different examples of classical conditioning here. So we look at, I'm not really going to go through this because you can go through this. This is going to be, or I'm going to be discussing the case of Pavlov. So we look at the sound, conditioned stimulus, the food, which is the stimulus, and the drool, which is the response. You're going to see a lot of words here: CSNS, UCS, UCR, and CR. So as I go down, it's going to make a lot more sense. All right, let me click this. All right, so let's look at this picture instead. It gives a better explanation. I will explain it here. So most people have heard of Pavlov or Pavlov's dogs. So before conditioning, food itself is an unconditioned stimulus, right? So the dog naturally is going to salivate at the sight or smell of food, right? That's the unconditioned response, is the dog salivating. Again, this is before conditioning. The neutral stimulus was the bell. So ring the bell, the dog does nothing, right? There is no response because there's nothing paired with it, because this is before the conditioning. So the dog's just like sitting there like, okay, it's a bell, whatever. All right, now we go to the conditioning. This begins. So you've got the neutral stimulus, which is the bell. Then we start the conditioning. So bell is rung, then the food is presented, and then the dog, the unconditioned response is the dog salivates. So when Pavlov did that multiple times, multiple trials, then just the sound of the bell alone would initiate the dog to salivate. That is the conditioned response. So after so many trials, the dog knew, bell rings, I get food, I'm going to eat, right? Same thing. Bell rings, food, dog salivates, I'm going to eat. So after a while, bell rings, dog knows food might be coming, so dog salivates. So again, it's this learning behavior. All right, so again, this just kind of explains it even more. You can go through it, click on the button, click on next, next, and it shows you what the neutral stimulus is, and then through the pairing, how everything becomes associated. And then generalization is a term that's used in classical conditioning. So the conditioned responses may also appear after various new neutral stimuli that are similar to the conditioned stimulus. So you can eventually generalize this to other things. And then the term discrimination: conditioned responses appear after the conditioned stimulus, but not after other conditioned stimuli. Discrimination generally learned by presenting other conditioned stimuli without the unconditioned stimuli. So if you go look in the book, it'll explain it more. And then of course we have some other terms in here with classical conditioning. We have acquisition, extinction, rest, and then spontaneous recovery. So with extinction, it's like you take the bell, you ring it, dog salivates, but there is no food, right? So that's what I'm talking about, is anything you learn, you can unlearn. So Pavlov rings the bell again, dog salivates, but again, no food is presented. After a few trials, dog realizes, oh, when he rings the bell, no food is coming, so I'm not going to salivate anymore because nothing's happening. So again, now the dog unlearns that behavior, and then the bell is just the bell. It's no longer associated with the food. Then we have spontaneous recovery. So the conditioned response recurs after time delay and without additional learning. When Pavlov rang the bell the next day, the dog salivated. So again, that spontaneous recovery can come alive again. And the conditioning, when you redo it, doesn't take as long. All right, now we look at the Watson and Rayner study with little Albert. This is an amazing study. And if you go further in your academia, in your bachelor's and your master's, you start learning more and more about these theorists. You learn more about their very specific research, other than kind of in general psych where you're learning like the baseline. You know that he's very famous for the study. actually kind of ruined his career. I learned that in my master's program, but this study actually ruined his career because he was a bad, bad boy, Mr. Watson, not the baby. The baby actually died, a little bit later in life, 4.5 years old, from hydrocephalitis, I believe is what it was. And again, if you go further in your academia in psychology, you'll learn more about Watson. But I put the link in here and you can watch this. This is the original study of little Albert being conditioned to fear a white rat and then other objects. It's actually very interesting. Sad, but interesting. And then as we move further, I will then get out of this and go into back into presentation mode. So in here, just give you some more examples of classical conditioning through other things, like advertising is one, learning that association. Taste aversion is another. So if you are, let's say you are working with substance abuse clients, if you decide to get into therapy, or you just want to learn about this in psychology, what with taste aversion is, again, this neutral stimulus, this new taste is just neutral. Then it's paired with an illness, the unconditioned stimulus, the unlearned reflex, which leads to that unconditioned response, is nausea. So in this example, we can use alcoholism, right? So if someone suffers with alcohol use disorder, what we would do, or what, maybe would be prescribed, is a medication, so that you take the medication and if you drink, it makes you sick. So eventually, just that feeling or knowing of getting sick if you drink, you associate that, with the alcohol, and what the object is to no longer drink. Is it effective? Yes, it is. Is it foolproof? No, it's not. But it is a great tool. Same with drug tolerance when we talk about addiction. All right, so now I will go back into presentation mode. All right, so looking at drug habituation, again, this just gives you a little bit of kind of a pictorial to look at it. The unconditioned stimulus is the medication, the conditioned response, the appearance of the drug tablets in the room where the person takes the drug, are the conditioned stimulus that are paired with the drug, which is the unconditioned stimulus. That leads to that response. The body prepares to receive the drug in the room. Repeated pairings of that unconditioned stimulus and the conditioned stimulus have produced that response. So these are just a lot of different examples for you to look at. All right, so now when we look at operant conditioning, so that was all classical conditioning. Again, that innate learned behavior. Think about like Jaws, the movie. If you've ever seen the movie Jaws, or maybe any other movie where you hear like that music, that dun dun, it automatically makes you like, ugh, cringe or whatever. So you have classically conditioned yourself to associate that. It's the same with like your alarm, your when the bell rings at school, like in high school, you hear that bell, you associate it with, I have to go get to class. You can associate it to songs, maybe it makes you think of something. So those are all that innate learning, that's classical. So now we move to the operant conditioning. So that is form of associative learning in which the consequences of a behavior change the probability of the behavior's occurrence. Now, this is where, again, in this PowerPoint, I'm going to give you, or lectures, I'm going to give you a lot of links that are really cool to give you examples of all of these concepts. So, operant conditioning better explains voluntary behaviors. That's the difference. Operant is voluntary. People get CC and OC, so classical conditioning and operant conditioning, mixed up. So here's a hint. Operant conditioning is about what comes after a behavior. Classical conditioning is what comes before an unconditioned stimulus. So as with classical conditioning, contingency is an important aspect of operant conditioning. When a rat pushes a lever, that's a behavior, that delivers food. The delivery of the food, the consequence, which is a good thing, is contingent on that behavior. So pressing that lever gets that food. So now we're looking at operant. All right, so looking at some big people in operant conditioning, we've got Thorndike, B.F. Skinner. So Thorndike's law of effect, consequences, strengthen or weaken that connection. So you can look in the book. There are a lot of videos, and I believe I've included that in this presentation. B.F. Skinner did expand on Thorndike's work through shaping, so reward approximations of the desired behavior. An important contribution of Skinner was that he standardized the language scientists use to refer to learning. So his undergraduate studies were not psychology, but English literature. Just a little fun fact. All right, he worked with Skinner, that is, worked with the US military to train pigeons to guide missiles and torpedoes. So that was like his kind of big claim to fame, which is really interesting. So down here, a box typical of the puzzle boxes Thorndike used in his experiments with cats to study the law of effect. Stepping on the treadle released the door bolts. A weight attached to the door then pulled the door open and allowed the cat to escape. After accidentally pressing the treadle as it tried to get to the food, the cat learned to press the treadle when it wanted to escape the box. So again, this is through rewards consequences. Well, Skinner then comes in, right? And he wanted to help the military during World War II by using pigeons' tracking behavior. So a gold electrode covered the tip of the pigeon's beaks. Contact with the screen on which the image of the target was projected sent a signal informing the missile's control mechanism of the target's location. A few grains of food occasionally given to the pigeons maintained their tracking behavior. All right, so shaping, teaching a bear to spin a ball on its nose. Is the trick too complex for the bear? No, it's not a problem. Look for whatever reason the bear can already do. Find the bear behavior that is closest approximation to the trick and train the bear to do that. That is all through shaping. As the bear improves, keep requiring ever closer approximations. Eventually, the bear masters the trick. So they have a better deep kind of dive. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there in the book if you're interested in looking at shaping behavior. All right, so when we look at reinforcement, there's all kinds of reinforcement and schedules of reinforcement. So reinforcement increases a behavior. So behavior followed by rewarding a consequence. With the sweet little baby here, maybe with the walking, right? They first, she's first walking, and maybe that reward is like they're clapping, like, good, such a good job. And that little child, all they want to do is like do it again for their parent to please them. All right, so rewarding stimulus is added, whatever that stimulus is. Reinforcement increases behavior. So we've got positive and negative reinforcement. With positive reinforcement, the behavior followed by rewarding consequence. Rewarding stimulus is added. So taking medication. Negative reinforcement, behavior followed by a rewarding consequence. So I've got a pounding headache, right? I take medication. Medication gets rid of the headache. So that aversive, unpleasant stimulus is removed. Said headache. All right. Reinforcement increases behavior. Here's a bunch of other reinforcement things that I might kind of skip over because it gets a little bit redundant. So we've got the behavior, turn homework in on time, positive reinforcement, teacher praises, right? Hey, great job. You did your homework on time. You're supposed to do that. Negative reinforcement, teacher stops criticizing. So if you stop turning in your work late, teacher stops saying, hey, What's up with you? Why do you keep turning your work in on time, right? So what is the effect on the behavior? All right, so now we look at other things. So this is, again, giving you an example of now skis. Positive reinforcement, you wax your skis, skis go faster. Guess what? Negative reinforcement, people stop zooming by you on the slope. Why? Because you waxed your skis, you're going faster. So what is the effect on the behavior? Just something, again, to think about. Now we're looking at press an odd button on dashboard of the friend's car. Positive reinforcement, great music starts playing. The negative, annoying music stops playing when we're looking at stopping that behavior. All right, again, we're looking at many concepts here. Okay. Learned helplessness. This is a great discussion. It was, came about through Martin Seligman's work with dogs. So click on this link and it'll bring you to a video that explains it quite well. I always, again, like to put extra explanation in my presentations. And through his work with dogs, later in therapy, we see that with victims of domestic abuse. So often people will say to domestic violence, people that have gone through it, they'll say, well, why don't you leave? Why do you stay? That's a big thing that we hear. And it's because of that conditioning through learned helplessness, through those attempts of trying to leave and being unsuccessful, you give up. So there's all kinds of attempts that are happening, and then there's that failure to reinforce, like nothing is working, so that you just stop trying. So this does a really good job kind of going over that. All right, so we're going to talk about primary reinforcers and secondary. So your primary are those innate satisfying, like drinking water, getting those things met that you need. The secondary, those are the fun things. Look at that ice cream there. That's just makes me want ice cream in a waffle cone. All right, so secondary reinforcers become satisfying through experience, repeated association with a pre-existing reinforcer. An example of that is a token economy. So that could be, when you're in school, like when you're in elementary school and you do really good on something and the teacher puts a star on it, or they give you little tokens and then there's Fun Friday and you could buy stuff. Or if we're going to get a little more deeper in substance, if we're talking about like AA and you've stopped drinking, day one, you get a chip. And then, after a week and so on, and then you have your year. And that is what's considered a token economy, getting something tangible that kind of shows the work that you've done. All right, going back to that stimulus generalization. So stimulus sets the occasion for the response. Responding occurs to similar stimuli. And that stimulus discrimination. Stimuli signal when behavior will or will not be reinforced. And then extinction and spontaneous recovery, all of these I have covered. So that is behavior decreases when that reinforcement stops. Again, reminder of the bell when you stop pairing it with the food, the dog stops to salivate. All right, continuous reinforcement, partial reinforcement. We're going to go through fixed variable ratio interval, fixed ratio variable interval. So we're going to learn all about it. And I got the pictures in here of the gambling. All right, so schedules of reinforcement. I'm going to break them down. I like to put the pictures in there. So fixed ratio. Reinforcement follows a set number of behaviors. So the example I like to give is a discount card. That is a fixed ratio. So maybe after, as we see here, 10 punches on the punch card, you're going to get a free something. Variable ratio. Reinforcement follows an unpredictable number of behaviors. So an average, like a slot machine, after so many variable, whatever times, you're going to win something. You're going to lose a lot, but then after an unpredictable amount, you're going to win some money. All right, let's look at fixed interval. So fixed interval, like Taco Tuesday. I thought that was a real popular one. So reinforcement follows behavior that occurs after a set amount of time has elapsed. So example, the discounted tacos occur on a predictable schedule every Tuesday. So it's that fixed interval. So it's fixed every Tuesday on that interval. All right, so interval is the reinforcement is tied to the specific passing of time, the arrival of Tuesday, you're waiting for that Tuesday, rather than the number of the responses. So again, it could be, like wing night Monday, wind down Wednesday, thirsty Thursday, whatever all the ones are. And then variable interval, reinforcement follows behavior that occurs after an unpredictable amount of time has elapsed. So example, like they give in the book, catching a fish, checking your cell phone, getting a drug test, right? So it's not any rhyme or reason. You check it when you can. So like your phone, right? You'll check it in between class. You might check it when you get up in the morning. So there's no set. That's variable interval. All right, this just gives you kind of a visual of the schedules of reinforcement. All right, now let's talk about punishment. Punishment decreases behavior. So we've got positive punishment, behavior followed by an aversive consequence. So it's very light right here. I forgot to darken that up. So behavior followed by an aversive consequence. Aversive is unpleasant stimulus that is added. So this negative thing is added. Negative punishment, it's dark there. Oh, that's why, because I put it in there. All right, so the negative punishment, behavior followed by an aversive consequence. And rewarding the stimulus is removed. All right, so now you get some more examples of reinforcement and punishment. So punishment decreases the behavior. Believe it or not, there's positive punishment and negative punishment. So the behavior is taking an aspirin or whatever after a headache. The positive punishment, allergic reaction, it's not positive, but if you have allergic reaction, guess what? You're not going to take that medication again. Just like if you take a medication that doesn't work for you, that taught you, yeah, this doesn't work for me. The negative punishment, lose sympathetic attention of friends. So again, this example they give in the text is a little bit kind of wonky, but I kind of go with it. It makes sense, but it's just a little bit like, wait, what? So the negative reinforcement of taking the aspirin for the headache goes away. So again, they always ask, what is the effect of the behavior? All right, so again, we're going into now, you come home 2 hours late from your curfew. So what is going to, what's that positive punishment? What is the negative reinforcement? What is the negative punishment? So again, you can pause, kind of look at this because there are more. Getting a ticket. There's always consequences, right, to that. So what is the effect on the behavior? All right, so when we look at this, break it down a little bit further. So positive reinforcement behavior. For example, you turn in your work project on time. Manager praises you for turning it on time. So what might that effect be? You're going to turn the next thing in on time. Looking at negative reinforcement. You take aspirin for the headache. Your headache goes away. The effect on the behavior, you take aspirin again the next time you get a headache. Why? Because you know, hey, I learned that if I do this, my headache's going to go away. Behavior, you don't replace the tires on the family car when your parents ask you to. Your parent gets angry at you for not replacing the tires. What is the effect on behavior? They repeatedly ask. You stop dawdling and replace the tires to avoid your parents' anger, right? You don't want to listen to them say, why don't you do this? So you do it. Negative punishment. So now we're breaking down positive reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. So the behavior, a teenager comes home 2 hours after curfew. They are grounded for 2 weeks. What is that effect on behavior? They don't come home late the next time. They're allowed to go out with friends, right? They don't want to do that. They don't want to get punished. All right, timing of consequences, immediate versus delayed reinforcement, immediate versus delayed punishment. Delay of gratification, that is the putting off the pleasure of an immediate reward to gain a larger reward later. So you might be like, if I ask for this, I might not get that. So maybe I won't ask for this. So I could save it for that. So I hope that makes sense. So timing can also affect human responses to punishing consequences. We can often avoid negative outcomes by imagining them in advance and behaving accordingly. A lot of times when kids get in trouble, like if they just stop and they think, maybe if I do that, this is probably going to happen. 9 times out of 10, they do it anyways, but then after they do it, they learn, right? Because through trial and error, eventually, hopefully, they learn, right? We learn. Applied behavior analysis, that is kind of a branch of psychology, looks at more of behavior. Again, learning is a behavior chapter. A lot of people become an ABA, a behavior analyst. Behavioral approaches imply that you can modify even long-standing habits by changing the reward contingencies that maintain those habits. Now, with this kind of career, they are more black and white versus in the mental health field, we're more gray. So sometimes we kind of have this little battle with our behavior analyst, but we both kind of look at each other and respect each other. But again, behavior analysts look at behavior. They're focused on what I can see. So applied behavior analysis is the use of operant conditioning principles to change human behavior, also called behavior modification. It's very used a lot in elementary school. Has become effective in a wide range of situations, controversial in treating children with autism. In the book, it says autistic children. As a therapist, we say children or adults with autism. All right, so here's some really cool classical conditioning links I've shared with you. So here's one just to give you a better understanding of what is classical conditioning. So click on this. This is an episode of The Office. It's very short. This is cell phones and the Pavlov effect. And this is looking at too many texts. When you hear a text go off, you automatically kind of look at your phone, knowing it's not you, yet you look at it. That's classical conditioning. And then operant conditioning, a couple cool psychology and media. I put in Big Bang Theory. This is a really funny one I believe this one is Sheldon training Penny. And then this one is on the guys together doing positive and negative punishment on each other. So two very funny examples of operant conditioning. All right, so now we're going to look at observational learning. I talked in the very beginning about the Bobo doll experiment. So I've linked the actual study here. So with observational learning, we've learned classical, we've learned observational, and now classical, operant, and now observational. So that's learning that occurs when a person observes and imitates behavior. So it's like monkey see, monkey do, watching. So Albert Bandura was the leading social cognitive theorist, and he came up with the Bobo doll experiment. So go ahead and click on that. Very interesting study. You will learn a lot about that if you continue and take a psych class in your bachelor level classes. Looks at 4 processes of observational learning: attention, retention, motor reproduction, and reinforcement. All right, so observational learning, here are the 4 things that I just outlined. So let's say, for example, learning to ski, attention to the instructor's words and demonstrations. So again, you're paying attention to that. Recall of instructors' actions and instructors' tips for avoiding disasters. That's retention. Use motor abilities to reproduce what the instructor has shown you. That's that motor reproduction. And then the incentives, such as praise from the instructor after you have completed a few moves on the slopes. That's that reinforcement or incentive conditions. Maybe they give you some free lessons. Who knows? All right, so do cognitions matter? So thoughts. Cognition means thinking. Of course it does. Does learning involve more than environment behavior connections? Of course it does. There is also purposive behavior in humans. Goal-directed and goal setting, self-regulation, and self-monitoring. These are things that are within us as learning human beings. All right, also looking at the cognitive factors in learning, again, thinking, expectancy learning, we have information value, latent learning, and implicit learning. So looking at this, I love this. This is so cute. He is trying to get to this. And so he's like, how do I get to this? Well, let me see. I'm going to build until I can get this. These are those cognitive factors through insight learning. What do I do to get there? Some more things just kind of run through: biological constraints, preparedness. Are we prepared? Instinctive, drift. You can look at this further in your text. Cultural influences. There's always going to be cultural influences, and there are going to be psychological constraints. So mindset. Do you have a fixed mindset? Are you fixed? Do you kind of stop where you're at? Like, this is what I know, this is what I've learned, I'm not willing to kind of go any further? Or do you have a growth mindset where you're willing to take other perspectives and other things into consideration? All right, learning styles. We've got visual, oral, kinesthetic. So you visual, you hear things, you have hands-on. Research suggests there is no actual advantage to instruction within one's preferred style. So meaning you might be more visual, you might be more auditory, but we have a range of, we need a lot of things to really learn fully. And that is that. I did go over my 30 minutes. It's in explaining the videos and whatnot, but please go and click on those links. They are very informative. You're going to see some hands-on stuff, some actual experiments from, for example, the social learning theory and the Bobo doll experiment, and then the Albert Bandura or the John Watson Rayner study with little Albert. Very, very insightful and a great learning experience. So I hope you got a little bit out of learning. It's a fantastic chapter. And again, this is also a career that you could get into if you liked it. And again, you could take an entire semester on learning where you will do a deep dive on just kind of all the things that I generally went over. So I will see you in the next chapter. So whenever you're watching, have a great day, great evening, great weekend, and peace.